Hey y'all, it's Lindsay. My husband is craving waffles. I promised y'all that I would show you how I make my waffles. I have been pushed down here to the basement because he has commandeered my kitchen upstairs for a chili cook-off that is getting very intense. So I'm gonna get you set up. I'm gonna show you how I make my homemade waffles. I like to keep these in the freezer or in the refrigerator, reheat them in the air fryer. They're fantastic. And they're pretty simple too. The way that this recipe works is it's a 1-1-1, a little pinch, which sounds confusing. But I'm going to decide how many eggs I plan to use for my recipe. I'm going to use 1 egg, 1 tablespoon of butter, and 1 tablespoon of my homemade baking blend, plus a little bit of baking powder and a little bit of salt. That's the basic ingredient list and the basic proportions. I have a dozen eggs today, so I'm going to use 12 eggs. And because it's a 1-1-1 ratio on eggs, butter, and baking blend, I'm going to make sure to use 12 tablespoons of butter, which is 1.5 sticks if you are here in the US. And then I'm going to use 12 tablespoons of this baking blend. I have a video that I will link in the iCards over here or down in the description box if you want a complete ingredient list and measurements on how I make my baking blend. I just keep a whole tub of this mixed up in my pantry at all times. Today, because I'm doing a dozen eggs, I'm going to use a teaspoon of baking powder, and then I'm going to use half a teaspoon of salt. Even if I do just 1 egg, 1 tablespoon of butter, and 1 tablespoon of the baking blend, I would still use about a 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder. Baking powder doesn't scale the same way that other ingredients scale when it comes to baked goods, so you might need to tweak the amount of baking powder you use for your environment and your ingredient volumes. One last thing, you can add a touch of sweetness to these if you would like to. I think I might add about a tablespoon or 2 of allulose. This will also help with the browning. A tablespoon or 2 for a full dozen eggs isn't going to add enough sweetness to make it super sweet, but it will add to the browning factor in the waffle iron. First things first, I've got a glass measuring cup, and I'm going to take 12 tablespoons of butter, 1.5 sticks. I don't use expensive butter for this because it's just going to get cooked. All right, I'm going to go pop this in the microwave so that it can melt down. I do want fully melted butter, but I want to let it cool down before I add it to my blender. I'm going to take my blender here. My family gifted me a Vitamix for Christmas, which gives my heart all the happies, and I'm looking for every excuse to use this all the time now because it's amazing. Okay, cracking eggs into my blender pitcher. Need a little trash can. These waffles freeze really well. They reheat beautifully in the air fryer for just a few minutes. Or if you have a regular slotted toaster, oop, man down. Don't worry, I rescued it. I rescued it all the way. A regular slot toaster can also work nicely. Okay, 1 dozen eggs, messy hands. I also highly recommend taking your eggs that you're going to use and separating them out as far as like putting them in a different container or laying them out so you don't have to constantly count how many eggs you have or do not have in your container. I'm gonna wash my hands, and that butter sounds like it's done. Butter is not quite there, but I've got my dozen eggs. Set you out of the way. And because I'm simple, I like to just use a tablespoon measurer. 12 tablespoons of my baking blend is the equivalent to 3/4 cups of baking blend, but I will just use a tablespoon, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. This is kind of to reinforce the idea that it's a 1-1-1 when it comes to eggs, butter, and baking blend. I'm going to use the back side of my measuring spoon and do 2 tablespoons of allulose, 1/2 teaspoon of salt. I do have a link in my description box for Redmond real salt. That's the only salt we use around here. I buy it in the 25-pound bags because it's a lot more economical that way. All right, I'm going to do 1 whole teaspoon of baking powder. And now we need to get this blending. And then we will slowly add our butter into the mix. Batter is made. I'm going to get my waffle iron, get that plugged in, and let that heat up while this batter rests for just a few minutes. Okay, I've got a 4 waffle iron here. I'm gonna see if I can't reach it around here. Okay, my waffle iron is super hot, and I do not put any kind of spray avocado oil or olive oil or anything like that on here whenever I make these. Instead, I rely on the butter that's already in this batter to give me all of the non-stick factor that I need. So I'm gonna go ahead and fill up each of my wells in my waffle iron here, but I wanna kinda underfill them just a touch so that they don't spew out everywhere. They're already steaming. I'm gonna let these go for probably about 3 minutes or so, flip them over because usually I find with my waffle iron, the browning happens more on the bottom than it does on the top element. So that's what I'm gonna do. And then we'll just keep rotating more and more waffles in. The steam is much. I'm gonna store these on a little rack so that they don't get too mushy while they cool down. Waffles. Next batch. I do want to say that even with a 4 waffle iron, this process is still a little bit slow, and if I were in my upstairs kitchen, I would probably be doing about 8 other things at the same time. But down here, I'm a little bit limited, and I do need to make sure that I'm not too far away from the waffle iron so I can flip the waffles and then get the next batch going in a timely fashion so nothing burns. My husband will usually eat these for breakfast 3 or 4 if it's the only thing he's eating. I'll usually eat 2 to 3 of them, and if I'm gonna have these alongside some eggs and bacon or yogurt or something like that, I probably lean more toward the 2 waffle side. They are very filling, which is great, and because they're so freezer friendly, I don't wanna like just blow through them because they do take time to make. So that's kind of one of the things that I like to do with this recipe, and it does make breakfast really simple when you already have something prepped in the fridge or the freezer. First batch of waffles I sent upstairs to my husband for breakfast. The second batch are cooling here on a wire rack so that I can flash freeze those when I'm finished doing all this. And batch number 3 is actively cooking in the waffle iron. Given the volume of batter that I have left here in my pitcher, I want to say I can get about another 2 batches of my waffles out of this much. Everybody's waffle iron is different sized, obviously, and if I can get 2 more batches of waffles from this, that will give me 20 total waffles out of a dozen eggs, which, given the fact that eggs constantly are just like being hiked up in price, that feels good. I'm just gonna hang out here and finish up these last few batches of my waffles, but if you wanna see what they look like plated up, I've got a video over here in the iCards or down in the description box below that has a variety of breakfast items where I display these specific waffles. So Go check that video out, and I would love for you to subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much to my returning viewers. I appreciate you so very much, and I hope to see y'all in my next video.